Hey guys, what's going on? It's Jay from Sony Alpha Lab, and what I got for you here in this video review is the Viltrox 23mm f1.4 lens. Now this is made for the crop factor E-mount cameras like the Sony A6400, A6600, A6100 for example, and it's a really high quality compact prime lens that's really fast f1.4 max aperture, which is awesome. So right now what I'm recording with is the Sigma 30mm f1.4 lens. Now 30mm with the crop factor works out to an effective 45mm range, which is what you're seeing. So let me show you what the 35mm effective range looks like compared to 45mm, because that's what 23mm works out to when you factor in the crop factor. So let me just switch it out to the Viltrox quick. And here's what it looks like with the 23mm f1.4 Viltrox lens, and it's at f1.4. I got my variable ND filter on there on the front. And you can see now I have a much wider view of the room. So you can see much more of the room, more of the desk here. You know, 35mm effective is significantly different than the Sigma lens that I normally use. So let's check the focus out real quick just so you can see how it works. And as you can see, it works pretty darn awesome. Yeah, works really well. All right, so now we're back. So as you can see, this is a much more zoomed in view. So if you need more room, you know, in your studio, or you need a wider view, the 23mm Viltrox would be a better option than the 30mm Sigma lens, for example. It just gives you that little bit wider of a view, which is really nice if you need to incorporate more of your studio, let's say, or you're closer to the camera. Right now the camera is about 4 feet away from me. That's about how much room I have. And then the window behind me is about 6 feet behind me. So that works out good for my environment. But like I said, sometimes you might want a wider view, or the camera might be closer to you and you just need a wider view. So that would be a good option for something like this. 35mm effective focal range is an awesome focal range for photography in general, even for portraits, street photography, all sorts of stuff. You can get really good perspective with a 35mm effective range lens, as you will see in the real world sample photos I'm about to show you. So this lens actually goes for $300 US. So it's a really, really good deal considering the build quality that you get and the feature set. So as you can see in my hands, this is what the lens looks like. It's very small and compact, and it's very lightweight. It only weighs 9.17 ounces or 260 grams, which again, that's very lightweight. Now it's a nice metal design. It feels really good in the hands. On the back here, you have the nice metal bayonet. You also have the USB port there for upgrades if you know, in the future, if you need to upgrade it. But it feels really well made, in my opinion. Better than I was expecting, to be honest. It also has this manual aperture ring that feels really good. Now, I do wish it had a lock here when set to auto. This is the auto mode right there, the little A. And that will basically, you just control the aperture with the camera. If it goes off auto, it'll automatically set the aperture to whatever value the lens is set to. So it's a nice feature for video. There's no clicking. It's nice and smooth, as you can see there. And you can see here it's AF23 1.4 for the Sony E-mount. Viltrox has a nice lens hood. It's got a pinch style lens cap here. You just squeeze it. And now looking at it from the front, you can see it's a 52mm filter thread. You could also see down in there the 9-blade circular aperture diaphragm. And then it has the minimum focus distance here, which is about 1 foot or 0.3 meters. And it has a nice lens hood. Goes on there pretty easy, like so. And then we have the focus ring here, and it's very smooth. Very smooth. Feels really good in the hands. So this has 11 elements in 10 groups in there. So there's quite a few pieces of glass in there. It's got some high quality stuff that will help, you know, ensure that there's no fringing and things like that. It also has HD nano multi-layer coating on the lens elements. So that will ensure, again, the really good contrast and things like that. So you won't have to worry about hardcore flaring. But you'll see more on that when you look at the sample photos. So let's move on to some lab testing here, and then we'll move on to some real world photos. I also have a little bit of sample video here. I want you to hear the stepping focus motor here, because the motor does make a little bit of noise. It's not very loud, but it does make some noise. So I want to make sure that you hear that as well. All right, let's move on to that. All right, guys, so here we are in the lab, and as you can see, the overall quality looks pretty darn good, in my opinion. There is definitely some distortion here. You can see on the top of the chart, the lens profile correction in Lightroom is not available for this lens at the time of this review, so I can't apply the lens correction. If I click the profile, nothing happens here, you can see. But you can manually manipulate it and try to fix the distortion and stuff like that if you like. But there is no built-in profile at this time for this particular lens. Now, this is, again, up here on the top left, you will see the EXIF data, and I am at f1.4. Now, if I zoom in here to the dollar bill, which is what I focused on, you can see the sharpness is actually really good, wide open at f1.4, but what I am seeing is some pretty significant fringing here. I got, a bright red line here, and then there's like a blue line to the right of that over here. The quarter has a little bit of fringing. The bokeh balls has a little bit of a green hue around them, as you can see here. Let me move over to the corner area. All right, so the corner area is pretty soft. It's definitely soft in the corners. You can see the sharpness from the dollar bill here is pretty good on the top right, and you can see the sharpness fall off as you move to the edge of the frame. So this lens definitely has soft corners wide open at f1.4 and does suffer from some fringing. However, in the center area, a pretty large area of the center, it's really sharp. Actually, f1.4, I mean, it's not razor blade tack sharp, but remember, this is a $300 lens with autofocus. So in the real world, this is going to be a pretty darn good lens. But if you want to, pixel peep and compare it to some much more expensive lenses, the corner area here would be sharp on a really expensive lens, like the Zeiss 24mm f1.8 lens, for example. That lens is like $1,000, $1,100 or whatever, but you will get better corner sharpness performance on that lens, and you also will have less fringing like you see here on the high contrast chrome. In addition, notice here in the corners how it's darkening. That's the vignette. So let's focus on the vignette for a second and watch when I step through the apertures. So here's f1.8, and notice, let me just go back to f1.4. Notice how the corners brighten up. You see that? 1.4, 1.8, 2.8, you could see a huge difference in corner brightness. See that? That's vignetting, and that is just the nature of lens optics when it comes to super wide apertures. So let me zoom in here at f1.8 so you can see the sharpness, and it did definitely sharpen up a little bit on the dollar bill, but it was pretty sharp at f1.4 in the center area. So let's see how this fringing looks. There's still a little bit of fringing here. There is a very slight amount of octagoning starting on the bokeh balls. And if I move out to the corner areas, they definitely are sharper than they were at f1.4, but they are still a little bit soft. So let's move on to f2.8 and let's see what we got there. All right, now we have a very crisp dollar bill. It looks really good. And I could tell already the corner sharpness has improved dramatically. So now we have pretty darn good corner sharpness. It is a little bit soft up here in the corner, but the rest of the circuit board is pretty good. So now the sharpness is basically up to like this area here, if you could see where I have the cursor and the hand. Let's see what f4 looks like. f4, we got pretty good sharpness here in the corner now. This is acceptably sharp for the corner area. So f4, you're looking pretty darn good in the center area in particular, and the corner areas sharpen up very nicely. And as you can see here on the chrome clamp that's holding the quarter, the fringing pretty much went away as well. So that fringing kind of dropped off when we stopped it down to f4, just so you are aware. Now f5.6, let's just zoom in here. Sharpness is excellent at f5.6. Really, really good detail here. You can see all the detail on the hairs now, and the corner sharpness is very good at f5.6. Step it up to f8. We even have more corner sharpness now. Center sharpness is still great, and the fringing is pretty much gone altogether. I don't see any fringing now on the high contrast areas, which is very good. Now we have f11, and again, sharpness is very good. The bokeh rendering still looks pretty darn good overall, I would say. No fringing, and it did soften up a little bit here due to diffraction, so the dollar bills are a little bit softer in the center area compared to f8. Moving on to f16, the dollar bills definitely softened quite a bit more. So peak sharpness looks like it's about f5.6 on this lens based on this lab testing, I would say. All right, so here we are at the minimum focus distance, which is about 1 foot or 30 centimeters. And let me just zoom in on the quarter so you can see what we're looking at. Now, this looks pretty darn good. It's not razor blade sharp, but it's pretty sharp. And there's a little bit of fringing here, but not too bad. Not as bad as it was when we were looking at the lab photos a second ago. Now you can see the bokeh balls are nice and round. They render really well. And there's a little bit of a green tinge on some of the edges of the bokeh balls, but overall, like these right here you can see, there's like a green halo around the bokeh ball. But overall, that looks pretty darn good. So let's go through the aperture here. I'm just going to go to f1.8. Looks pretty good. The quarter sharpened up a decent amount. Still a little bit of fringing here on the high contrast chrome. And the bokeh balls look pretty good. They are starting to octagon just a little bit, but not too bad. Now the bokeh balls at f2.8 are pretty darn octagon. They have like a nice harsher edge here. They're still not perfectly round, but they still look good. They have a little bit of a green halo here and there in some areas, like right here. But again, not too bad. There is a little bit of fringing on the quarter still, like right here you can see that red. Right there, there's like a little bit of red. Overall, pretty good though, I would say. Now let's move down to f4. f4 looks very, very sharp. So f4 is definitely noticeably sharper. And let's see here, f5.6 is a little bit sharper than f4, but about the same. And then we go to f8. f8 looks pretty darn good. And here we have f11. Sharpness is still looking really good. There's zero fringing to speak of that I could see. And f16. We get a little bit soft here because of the diffraction phenomenon. So there is some softness there. If I back out to f11, it's looking pretty sharp, not bad. f8 is very sharp. f5.6 is excellent, very, very sharp, f5.6. f4 is also very sharp. And then we have f2.8 is looking really good, but there is a little bit of fringing at f2.8 more than at f4 and f5.6. f5.6 pretty much is where the fringing goes away. f4, there is still a little bit of fringing. You can see it on the A right here, just a little bit right here on the chrome, but nothing crazy. And then at f4 or f2.8, you can definitely start to see more fringing on the high contrast areas. But overall, I would say this lens performs really good considering the cost, okay? You gotta understand, we're comparing $1,100, the Zeiss 24mm f1.8, to this lens. Like, that's what I'm comparing. That lens definitely performs significantly better than this lens. However, this lens is f1.4, which is much faster and much better for low light photography, and it costs only $300, you know, compared to $1,100. So that is a significant difference, and you must factor that in. But at the end of the day, you can see here in the lab testing that this lens does definitely suffer from softness in the corners at those wide open apertures, has pretty significant vignetting, has some fringing as well, but the center area is pretty darn good as far as sharpness goes, and the color rendition looks really good overall, I would say. And the distortion is fairly well controlled. It's not that bad. There is a little bit of distortion, but it's not too much. All right, so moving on to some real world photos here. We have just some sample photos from this place called Tin Barn Brewery. And they have some really good food here from this, restaurant called The Helm. They come in here and they provide some killer barbecue style food for the brewery, and you can see just real world photos. The color, clarity, contrast, sharpness in the real world is very, very good. Here's just a picture of one of their beers, and you can see the detail, color, clarity is fantastic. I mean, that looks really good. Now here's just a picture of sunglasses. Just look how cool that looks. You can see the depth of field fall off. The background bokeh rendering is really buttery. Now, if you look over here at this bokeh ball, it's not perfectly round. I was at f2.8 for this particular shot, but still looks really good overall, I would say. Now, this one is the same type of shot, except this one's at f1.4, and you can see the bokeh balls are now nice and round here, for example. And this is just my brother's hand. And I was just walking around the facility here. They have a couple of cool, little props. I don't even know what you want to call it, hangout areas. But due to the COVID, of course, we're not allowed to hang out inside at the moment. But you're allowed to walk through there. And here's their label maker machine for their beers and stuff. And I always love looking at this type of, automation hardware and stuff like that. It's very interesting to me. The mechanical engineering and all that stuff is so cool. But look at the depth of field play here. You can see the roll in the front is out of focus. I focused back here on the machinery itself. And then again, the background out of focus area out here looks really good. There is a little bit of blue fringing and stuff like that in these super high contrast areas, but nothing crazy. Now, again, remember I was telling you in the real world how the corner sharpness isn't really going to be that big of a deal. Well, here's a good example of that. This is wide open at f1.4. Now let me zoom in. Look at the sharpness. It's absolutely killer on this tractor at f1.4. So in the real world, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can't really complain. The sharpness is very, very good. I mean, that's a good thing about the lab, is how it does point out these flaws and stuff like that. But in the real world, that corner sharpness isn't as big of a deal in this type of photography as it would be in, let's say, high quality architecture photography, where the corners have to be absolutely tack sharp, distortion has to be absolutely perfect, things like that. But in the real world, for everyday shooters like myself, this lens really performs well, and I'm very happy to have it in my arsenal. Here's just a picture of their brick oven style pizza thing. Now they have this cool shuffleboard here, just a depth of field fall off type shot. You can see it's blurry here in the foreground, sharpens up here right around in this area is where the focus ended up landing, and then you can see the depth of field fall off throughout the scene. And again, 24 millimeter, which is an effective 35 on the crop factor, gives you a pretty wide angle view, and it's just a nice range to have for photography purposes, especially when doing something like this. Here's one of Layla, and she's just making a funny face, but again, f1.4, look at that sharpness on her eye. It's excellent. Very, very good. Background rendering looks great. Nice 3D pop on the photo. Here's one of Jasmine coming towards me. If I zoom in, you can see it looks pretty darn good. The lighting isn't the greatest, but still pretty darn good shot. Now in this high contrast area, there is a little bit of green fringing on the baluster here, just so you're aware. Here's one of Jace, and these are raw files, by the way. And you can see, looks pretty darn good, very sharp. Now here's another one of Jace. I actually edited this photo a little bit here in Lightroom. So you can see this one looks pretty good. Nice crisp color, contrast, that depth of field you can see in the foreground here is blurry. The background trees there are a little bit blurry. This was actually shot at f2.8 due to the really bright conditions. The shutter speed maxes out at 1/4000th of a second on my A6400. So I had to stop it down a little bit in order to get the proper exposure, because I didn't have an ND filter handy. Now here's one of Layla, and this one, just because of the way the perspective is on the road, offers a little bit more 3D. I didn't do anything to this photo, so this is straight off the camera. But again, look at the sharpness on the face. It's at f2.8, it looks great. Here's just another one of Jace. Pretty harsh lighting. And there's another one. Here's one of Jace just smiling here. He didn't want to look at the camera, but again, look at the background depth of field fall off. This is at f1.4. You can see my dad's truck here in the background and my mom's car here. And it's looking pretty good. And here's my mom, one of the most wonderful people on the planet. And she's just adoringly looking at my son, Jace. And here's one of Layla. So here's like a kind of like a wide angle perspective view of what this lens can do. So 24 millimeter, I'm pretty much just standing over her, and I'm able to get, her feet and, pretty much everything in the shot. And it came out really good. Look at the sharpness. It's fantastic. Now this image I actually edited in Photoshop. So I, did some work here. I did add some extra vignetting to just really try to make this more 3D looking. And I just cleaned up a couple of spots on her face, and I was pretty happy with that result. Now here's one of Sophie on my parents' couch, and you can see Again, the sharpness is very, very good, and the focus works really good. It's super accurate. It was focusing on the eye of the dog because I had animal eye AF on for those shots. And here's just a couple of pictures of flowers that were in my mom's little garden here, and you can see they look really good. And here's just a depth of field fall off type shot of the flower, so you can see that background just blur out as the distance goes on. And here's another one. Now here's just a picture. I just took a quick snapshot in the mirror, my rear view mirror in the car, so you can see the A6400 and the lens. I was at the Basher Kill for that shot. And here's a picture of the Basher Kill. Now I didn't do anything to this. This is straight off the camera. But if I were to edit this a little bit, I would definitely just straighten the horizon a tad. And what else would I do here? I would jack up the vibrance, jack up the clarity. I would add a medium contrast curve like so. Then I would drag up the shadows, bring a little more shadow detail in there. I might drag the highlights down to get a little more punch in the clouds there. And, you know, something like that. Before and after, you could see here's the raw file and here's the quick correction. So, you know, pretty darn good quality, I would say, right off the camera. I'm very impressed with this lens, especially for the price point. Now, I just wanted to show you a couple more shots here. Now, this one I took at f1.4, and I focused on the tall grass here in the foreground, and you can see how the background renders on this mountain here. Now, these guys were fishing, and I got this capture just looking up, and you can see it came out pretty darn good. Now, here's just a picture, and there was a bee on this little weed here. Came out pretty darn good. Looks nice in 3D in my opinion. And here's just like a depth of field fall off type shot. I would actually raise the exposure on this quite a bit to bring that up. Maybe drag the vibrance up a little bit and a little bit of clarity. Drag the shadows up just a touch, something like that. And that shot looks pretty darn good. Now this one I did play around in Lightroom a little bit so you can see how I adjusted the settings, and I'm really happy with this picture. It's f1.4 because I wanted this foreground elements to be out of focus. So you can see this foreground, it's nice and blurry, and the depth of field basically comes up, and I focused on this area here in the back of the frame. So on a landscape image like this, you get this nice 3D effect where it pulls you into the image to the focal point, which is back here. And that's something you could really only do with a fast lens. A lot of times you might think landscapes, you want to have it everything sharp from foreground all the way to background. But in some cases, you might want to create this depth pull effect, which I honestly really enjoy doing. And this is a good example of that in my opinion. And I actually went back to that Tin Bar Brewing place the other day with my friends, and I just took this quick shot. I was actually holding the camera in my hand with this beer in my hand, so I was able to just take this shot easily with the 24 millimeter, you know, that because the minimum focus distance is only 1 foot approximately. So I was able to hold the camera and the beer and take this picture no problem, which is nice with a wide angle lens. With the Sigma 30 millimeter, for example, it's much harder to take this shot. I have to actually stretch out in order to get it. But with the 24 millimeter, it was much easier. Now here's one of Layla on the first day of school. This was taken at f1.4 straight off the camera. So if I drag up the shadows a little bit and do something like that, pull the highlights back just a tad, you know, I could rein it in a little bit. But you could see overall image quality, real world, look how great this looks. Fantastic. This is a $300 lens, guys, with autofocus, and it works really well. Here's one of Jace, and of course they're doing that virtual stuff with the schooling. And here's just one of Jace's toy. It's like a Bakugan or something it's called. It's a pretty cool toy. It's like a ball and it like turns into something when it hits a magnet. But just look at that depth of field 3D pop that this image has. I thought it was pretty cool, you know, just example of what this lens can do. And here's one of Jasmine loafing on the couch like a lazy dog. Are you a happy girl? You a happy girl? What about you? Hmm? Hmm? Where are you going? Where are you going, you cutie? What are you doing? Aww. Aww, you guys want pets? You guys want pets? And you can see that sharpness is absolutely awesome. Here's another one of Sophie. And she's looking pretty cute here. Let me zoom in here so you can see. The sharpness is excellent in my opinion. Now here I just took one out in the backyard just a couple of minutes ago because I wanted to show you the shooting into the sun, what kind of flaring and, you know, high contrast problems you might have. And you can see here there's this like red arc. That's a little bit of flaring there. And if I zoom in up here, you can see there's a little bit of a washed out area on the roof there, but the sun is like right here. So that's actually pretty darn well controlled. Now also up here, you can see there's a little bit of purple fringing on the tree in this super high contrast scene. Now I changed the angle of the camera a little bit, opened it wide open to f1.4, just so I can get this lens flare on the tree trunk so you could see it a little better. So it does have kind of a weird lens flare based on this testing. I didn't test the lens flaring in any other environment, so I can't say for sure exactly what it'll look like in all environments, but in this test, the sun was right up here in this corner, and you can see the sun. The sun was in the frame, and this is the flaring effect that I got wide open at f1.4. So that is pretty much it for the real world photos, guys. Let's move along. All right, guys, so at the end of the day, the Viltrox 23mm f1.4 lens is a awesome lens for the money, in my opinion. Now, it does suffer clearly from some vignetting, especially at the wide f1.4 aperture, and it does have a little bit of distortion as well. However, the image quality overall is excellent. It's very sharp, as you saw in the lab testing, and in the real world, it looks great. And honestly, I don't really mind the vignetting. It's easy to fix in a program like Lightroom if you don't want it, but it is there, so that is a definite significant lens flaw, you could argue, for sure. But it's pretty easily correctable, so I don't really find it that big of a deal. And at the end of the day, it works excellent. You know, I tested it on the video. In the real world, the focus is pretty fast. It's pretty quiet. It does make a little bit of noise, more noise than the Sigma lens, but it's still fairly quiet for the most part. And if you're using a mic like I'm using up here, a shotgun mic, you're not going to hear the lens noise. If you're recording video and using the camera, you know, to record the audio, you will hear the focus on the lens. So again, for $300, this lens has a great feature set with the manual aperture ring. I really wish the aperture ring had a lock on it so it wouldn't turn automatically. That kind of sucks because it switches off of auto mode, which is what I prefer to use. And it'll move off to auto mode and put you on like F16 sometimes and stuff like that. So I wish it locked like on auto and had a click there, but it doesn't do that. So it's pretty easy to move the aperture ring. That's really the only problem I have with this lens, to be honest. Other than that, I was very happy with it. It performed really well, and I highly recommend it, especially for a $300 price point. The focal range of an effective 35mm is excellent for a variety of photography and video purposes. So it's definitely worth checking out and considering if you're in the market for a lens like this. If you guys have any questions, be sure to let me know below in the comments area. And if you have this lens already, let me know what you think of the lens. Please do me a favor, be sure to subscribe and be sure to hit that thumbs up if you found this video useful, and then also hit that notification bell if you want to get an email when I come out with new videos. In addition, if you thought this video was really good and you got something out of it, you can give me an applause. There's an applause button down there. It's just a way to help creators, and it's a new feature that YouTube just introduced to me, so I just wanted to share that with you as well as an option. In any event, I will catch up with you guys next time. Please stay tuned. I got a lot of new gear coming, and I'm looking forward to reviewing it. So I will catch up with you guys next time. Take care.